It is said that most men, at one time or another, have the urge to build a house. But what is the compulsion, the obsession? What is the compelling power that leads a man to build and build and build? Is the resulting splendor always the product of pompous, pretentious dreams? Or can love be extravagant too? It is written. This is George Vandeman. Today, It Is Written presents The Extravagant Builders. The tourist bus rolled to a stop on the grounds of a palace in the Bavarian Alps. The guide confided into the loudspeaker, they called him the Crazy King. Well, I will tell you something. The Crazy King was not crazy at all. And of course, he was speaking of Ludwig II, known as the Mad King of Bavaria. The guide explained. In Munich, they said that he was so extravagant that he must be crazy. But today, the state of Bavaria can afford to keep up its other old castles because of the admission fees at Linderhof. Neuschwanstein and Herrenchiemsee. So who's crazy? Don't touch anything, and don't walk on the parquet. Those three palaces, which I would just as soon not pronounce twice, were built by Ludwig. Neuschwanstein, the most dramatic of the three, for which a more beautiful site could not have been chosen, rises from a crag in the Bavarian Alps with a view of a clear, cold lake. Ludwig II, by any standard, was a strange man. Certainly he was extravagant. Who else would demand a bed that took 17 men 4.5 years to carve? Who else would want a couch with mirrors at both head and foot so that he could see himself constantly? Who else would talk to trees and keep a spare bedroom for the ghost of Louis XIV and have a bathroom full of artificial stalactites? Who but he would want a golden rococo sleigh drawn by 6 plumed horses so that he could ride by moonlight all alone? Yes, all this for himself, for he spent his life alone. He was once engaged and an elaborate wedding was planned, but he backed out at the last because he decided he was secretly in love with his cousin, the Empress Elizabeth of Austria. Building and decorating were his life passion. One of his castles had 12 royal rooms. In one of them was the peacock throne. The birds were made of zinc with plumage of glass and enamel. He dined alone, but usually the table was set for 3 or 4. One chair may have been for the deceased Louis XIV. Ludwig liked his meals served with all of the pomp and display of royalty, but sometimes he would decide suddenly to be served while perched in the branches of a lime tree in the garden. The god of my life, the king once wrote, is Richard Wagner. His obsession with Wagner resulted in the grotto Linderhof. Here was an enclosed pool complete with swan boat and canvas stalagmites. A wall painting showed the first act of Tannhauser. The grotto was lighted by the first dynamos in Bavaria. Ludwig II died at the age of 40, leaving all his splendid construction for the enjoyment of tourists today. Louis XIV in the preceding century was also a compulsive builder. He wanted a palace so big and so splendid that it would announce to all the world the power and the glory of France and of its ruler, whose emblem was the sun. In 1682, when he moved his court to the new chateau at Versailles, 36,000 men and 6,000 horses were still laboring to get it completed. Imagine, to the end of his reign, which lasted 72 years, Louis never stopped adding, changing, and building. Mark Twain saw it, and he wrote, "You gaze and you stare and try to understand that it's real." The members of Louis's court could pass their time strolling in the promenades. And then who's not been fascinated by William Randolph Hearst San Simeon? Began as only a campsite on his father's ranch, grew until it covered 275,000 acres, and stretched for 50 miles along the California coast. Hearst had a passion for collecting, especially like the ceilings of historic Italian and Spanish buildings. He simply had them taken down and moved in sections. Eventually, he was buying whole buildings. He once bought an old Spanish monastery, then constructed a narrow gauge railroad to get it out. Money meant little to him. At his peak, he spent it at a rate never matched by any other American and by few kings in the past. He behaved, his wife once said, as if he and San Simeon were to last forever. Yet he must have had some doubt about his own permanence, for he had a morbid fear of death. He wanted no one to mention it. Guests often came to his table in fear that by some slip of the tongue they might violate his taboo. Well, finally his financial empire began to crumble in places. Spending had to be cut. And so when San Simeon could no longer be one continuous house party, he moved out, left it empty. And when none of his sons could afford to take it on, it was given to the state of California. Today, tourists come by the busload to wonder at the extravagant splendor left by a builder whose millions could buy anything he wanted except what he seemed to want most. More than anything else, William Randolph Hearst, like most of us, wanted to keep on living. He didn't want to die. He wanted to live forever. And he could have. There was another builder, a small town carpenter, who never built a house of any kind, much less a mansion, who could have arranged it for Mr. Hearst. He could have granted his wish if he had asked. It was the same carpenter who rested beside a well one day, tired and hot and dusty. He asked a stranger for a drink. Then he said to her, as recorded over here in John 4, verse 10, right here in the beginning of the New Testament. John 4, verse 10. He said, if you knew who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. And his next words were even more exciting. He says here in verses 13 and 14, he said, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Imagine. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up to everlasting life. Was this humble, unassuming carpenter offering her life that would never end? Evidently he was. For not long after that, he said to a large group of people who sought him out on the shore of a lake. Right here in the 6th chapter and the 51st verse, Jesus himself said this. He said, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If a man eats of this bread, he will live forever. Now, did he mean that those who accepted the living water and the living bread would just keep on living, never touched by death? Would death be simply the door into a never-ending life? No, no. A man named Enoch never died. A man named Elijah never died. But most believers would die and then enter into that life by means of a resurrection. The carpenter made it very clear. He explained here in verse 40. He said, for my Father's will is that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I will raise him up. See, I will raise him up at the last day. Let me say it again. I will raise him up at the last day. That's the bold claim. Listen, friend, but the carpenter of Nazareth left no doubt about what he meant. For on another occasion, he said very plainly, recorded in John 11, verse 25, he said, I am the resurrection and the life. That's where our eternal life comes from. It comes from Him and is given at the time of the resurrection. How do we know that that humble carpenter who claimed to be the Son of God, how do we know that he could give life to the dead? That's an important question. How do we know it? Isn't this just an idle claim that he made? We know it, friend, because he demonstrated it by calling his friend Lazarus to life after Lazarus had been dead 4 days. He demonstrated it by walking out of the tomb himself after spending 2 nights there. If only William Randolph Hearst had asked the carpenter of Nazareth, didn't he know? Didn't anyone ever tell him? Among all those guests who were so careful not to mention death in his presence, didn't anyone ever tell him about what I've just revealed? Those magnificent builders and their magnificent castles all had one thing in common, their impermanence. And the builders were less permanent than their castles. Their castles survived them. Ludwig II spent only 9 nights in one of his castles, and then it was left for others to enjoy. Marie Antoinette fled from her idyllic toy village before an angry mob, and soon was executed. And remember George Bolt, his little isle in paradise, so shattered so soon by the death of the beloved wife for whom his magnificent castle was intended? He never even had a chance to present it to the one he loved. It's been that way with the magnificent cities of the past, too. The proud cities of Egypt are only ruins now. Great Babylon, with only wild beasts for its inhabitants today. Tyre, the New York of its day, is now only a place where fishermen spread their nets. Sodom is somewhere under the Dead Sea. All alike had one thing in common. They failed to endure. They did not last. But in God's country, it'll not be that way. Of it we are told in the last book of the Bible, Revelation 21, verse 4, the second last chapter. Revelation 20, here it is, 21, verse 4. It says, "And there shall be no more death." Isn't that a wonderful promise? No more death, and the prophet Isaiah, describing it, speaks to the heart of every builder, every man who's ever built a house. Listen to this, over here in Isaiah 65, verses 21 and 22. Isaiah 65, 21 and 22. He said, "And they shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall also plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit." Did you notice that? They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For as the lifetime of a tree, so shall be the days of my people, and my chosen ones shall wear out the work of their hands. Isn't that an interesting rendering? Think of it. No more building of a beautiful home, furnishing it, decorating it, surrounding it with gardens, breathing living color, adding all of the little touches that make it uniquely your own, and then having it to leave to others to enjoy? No, in God's country, you can live to wear out what you build. Well, the days of God's people, says the prophet, will be as the days of a tree, a pine, a cedar, a giant sequoia that lives for thousands of years. No, 1,000 times no, a tree that will never die. The Apostle John describes it over in that last book of the Bible, Revelation 22, 1 and 2. "And he showed me a pure river of the water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb, and in the midst of the street of it, on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations." That tree will never die, neither will those who eat its fruit. Where is that tree? It's in a city built by God Himself. Long ago, a man named Abraham was called to leave his proud city and follow his Lord's leading into a strange country. And one day God said to him, over here in the first book of the Bible, Genesis 13, verses 14 and 15, one day God said to him this. He said, and now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. But Abram lived in tents the rest of his life. He never owned a piece of land except a little plot that he bought to bury his wife in. Was he disappointed? Did he feel God had let him down? No, of course not. Listen, why? Because over here in the New Testament, describing the same man and the same experience, in Hebrews, the 11th chapter and the 10th verse, he says this, for he was looking for the city which has foundations. Now notice, whose architect and builder is God. So God is a builder too. God has built a city. Tell me, what kind of a city would God build? Would it be more modest? Would it be less lavish than the finest creation of men's hands? Oh, I urge you to read at your first opportunity the last two chapters of the Bible, the 21st and the 22nd chapters of Revelation. You'll find there a description of the city that God has built. You'll find there a city with foundations and walls and streets and gates and precise measurements. Obviously, there's nothing unreal or fanciful or symbolic about it all. It is very real as our cities today. Now, it would not be surprising at all if the Apostle John, who was shown the city in vision, should have some difficulty in finding words to describe all that he saw. For how could the limited vocabulary of men ever capture the splendor of a city that God himself had built? Yes, friend, what emerges here is the picture of a city lighted by the glory of God. Imagine. Its construction of pure, transparent gold. Its walls of jasper. Its gates, each of a single pearl. And its foundations, either made of or adorned with precious stones. And then imagine, if you can, the magnificent beauty of it all as the light from the throne of God in rainbow colors is reflected in the transparent gold of the city and its jasper walls. Can you see it? Well, I suppose that a very rich man might construct a miniature model of the city, say a foot square, and set it with a few diamonds and rubies. But the city that God has built, as near as we can tell, is about 375 miles on a side. We can only conclude that God is the most extravagant builder of all. Extravagant in the best sense of the word. And that's the way God is. You see, God's plan to save men, to those looking on, may appear extravagant. It may seem to go beyond the bounds of good judgment. We might say, what a waste, for he's provided for so many when so few comparatively will accept it. But no, he wanted to be sure that there's enough and to spare. There's no extravagance that can equal the extravagance of divine love, my friend. When Marco Polo returned to Venice with his accounts of Oriental splendor, the people wouldn't believe him. They thought he made it up. It is said that when he lay on his deathbed, he was urged to confess that he had lied. But he said, I never told the half of it. Neither did the Apostle John, or any Bible writer, nor have I. For the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, 1 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, and the 9th verse. Listen to this, written just for my message today. Surely, listen, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. Yes, the carpenter of Nazareth never built a house, so far as we know, at least not while he was with us. He lived out his life in poverty, ministering for 3.5 years with no place even to lay his head. But in his mind's eye, he could see a country from which he had come. A country where he could build the most lavish, extravagant homes for those he loved. At hand would be unlimited stores of silver and gold and precious stones. If only his people could know what he had in mind. But words, our words, were so inadequate. And so shortly before he left this world, he simply said, as recorded in John 14, 1-3, "Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. For I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also." Has your heart been troubled? Have you been tempted to feel that you're alone, that nobody cares, that the future holds nothing for you? Listen, the carpenter of Nazareth is speaking. He is saying, "Don't be troubled. In my Father's country, there are many places to dwell. There's so much room, enough and to spare. I'll be stopping by at planet Earth one of these days real soon, and you're so welcome to come home with me." Yes, friend, you are so welcome. Why not send word just now that you accept this invitation? Why not tell him that you'll be ready and waiting to make the trip with him? For at the end of that journey, if you choose to make it, you'll find waiting a home built by the carpenter of Nazareth, especially for you. And that isn't the half of it. Listen.
Sometimes I hear sweet music like none e'er heard before, come floating softly earthward as through heaven's open doors. It seems like angel voices in tones so soft and low that thrill the mighty chorus around the throne above. Oh, sweet celestial music heard from a land afar, a song of heaven and homeland. Through doors God leaves ajar. Oh, that will be glory for me, glory for me, glory for me, when by his grace I shall look on his face. That will be glory. Big glory for me. This music haunts me ever like something heard in dreams. It seems to catch the cadence of heavenly winds and streams. My heart is filled with wonder to think someday to come I'll sing it with the angels, that song of heaven and home. Around the throne, God's
Thank you, Marilyn Cotton. Shall we pray? Loving Lord, evidently we've misunderstood and underestimated your power and desire to please your people. Our minds are so narrow, so selfish, so limited. Break open our vision and help us to see what God has promised in the future for those who love Him. Please accept our confession of faith just now in your saving name and prepare us for a home too, dear Lord. Amen.
My name is Lonnie Melashenko. Would you like to know more about the city that God has built? Then you'll want the book that we're offering you today as our gift. It's Pastor Vandeman's book, Destination Life, and we'll tell you in a moment how to ask for it. It's a book about the future, about life on the other side of death, about the future that God has planned for us and how it can be ours, and how we can avoid the deceptions of an enemy who would like to cheat us out of that future. Destination Life. You'll want it. Don't miss it. Ask for it by name, Destination Life, so we'll send the right book. And now here is the information you need.
You may request Pastor Vandeman's free offer by writing directly to It Is Written, Box O, Thousand Oaks, California, 91360. The offer is sent by mail, free and postpaid. Our address is easy to remember. Just It Is Written, Box O, that's Box 0, Thousand Oaks, California, 91360. Please be sure to ask for the offer by name and we'll put it into the mail right away. It takes only a few moments to write, but it could mean a lifetime of satisfaction. While you're writing down the address, let me remind you to invite a friend to watch It Is Written with you next week on this station. The address again is It Is Written, Box O, Thousand Oaks, California, 91360. Please mention the offer by name and write It Is Written, Box O, Thousand Oaks, California, 91360. Thank you for your letters, your prayer requests, and your liberal support, which is so necessary in a television ministry like this.
Thank you, Lonnie. But now the time has come all too quickly to say goodbye, everyone. But remember, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God.